it's time. Okay, let's start. So, hi everybody. Can someone close the door just to make it a little easier? So, let me get started. So today I'm going to talk about running the first Lambda code function with VSCode and Node.js. I'm going to cover two things, mainly creating this Lambda function, but also I'm going to talk a little bit about development techniques and things that will save you time, money, make you more efficient developer. And let's get started. So just get this slide in and out. This is a little bit about me and all the important stuff. I think the most important is my wife on here. She really supports me, letting me do a lot of this testing and research and do these presentations. So without her, I really can't be here. And she's actually here today, which is great. So she's also able to, learn. But that's the most important thing you're going to get out of the slide. So what we're going to do is go over the requirements real quick. If you're familiar with AWS, which I assume everybody is, you're going to need an AWS account. We're going to create an actual AWS Lambda function with the same application by the command line. We're going to test and debug everything in VSCode. We're going to learn how to code fast and efficiently. We're going to develop an MVP. We're going to deploy it to production. And then if there's time, we're going to learn how to develop our second MVP. So the software we need, obviously, an AWS account, VSCode, we're going to have Docker running in the background. You don't need to have any experience with Docker. We're just going to install that, have it on our service in the background. We're going to install the VS toolkit for VSCode, the AWS toolkit for VSCode, some command line tools for both SAM and AWS command line, and obviously JS. Requirements, obviously, we're going to need a URL for what we're going to do for our API call. We're obviously going to create a Lambda function, AWS serverless. We're going to use S3 storage. We're going to use framework store, and we're going to use SDS with runtime. So let's get ready to create our first Lambda function. And I wanted to cover these slides specifically to try to help you guys miss any kind of steps that happen while creating VS Code using the wizard through here. So when you first load up the command palette in VS Code, you'll type in Lambda or create Lambda function. And we're going to select this first one called create Lambda SAM application. When it pops up, you'll want to create the Node.js version that you want to use. And again, I'm going a little extra detail, so I'll save you the headache of making the wrong mistakes here. You do not want to select the ones with an image. That'll create a Docker image, and later on, you will maybe come across the need for that. But for this use case, we're going to use the non-image ones. I'm using the latest version that's available on AWS, which is 18. Depending on what version of Node.js you're experienced with, you might want to use an older version because there is some stuff that changed. But if you're new, use the latest version. It's worth learning. So next thing is you're selecting the architecture. This Node.js function in on your local machine. So this is another thing that if you're thinking, hey, when I'm finally done, it's going to be ARM. Look at your laptop because this is for local testing, not for production. And then we're going to do the Hello World SAM application. Someday, when you get to the point where you're ready to learn about step functions, that's when you'll then use that other example. Then you're going to set where you're going to put your actual project. This is a root folder that'll create another folder for you. Again, in this example, I already have a function called, or a folder called Lambda where I put all my Lambda functions in. So I'm just going to select that. But if the first time you run this, you're going to want us to do the set folder. And then go ahead and give your actual folder a name. That's typically also the name. And this is where I want to make sure everybody gets this. It says hit enter. If you click out of here all the steps we just did, you just lost it. You have to go read through all this. You have to hit enter on your keyboard. Or else so hopefully that'll save all of you guys the location that I have to put time. All right, so when we generate this, it's going to create the style. You'll eventually want to go back and rename some of these files, but it's going to be called Hello World, and it'll give you this nice read. I'm going to try to skip all this stuff that's already written up, which will get you started on how to deploy it, but we'll touch on it a little bit. The big thing is I want to get into meat potatoes and actually get coded. The main file in this project is going to be called app.js or app.mjs, depending on the version. And when it comes up, the guts of the code will have some comments at the top, which will help you hit them so you can see the actual slide. And then the actual function that everything starts out. It's a nice, simple hello world application and returns it or. So let's talk before we get into writing this function a little bit about testing, debugging, and VSCode. So if you're not familiar with the debugger, there's really three main things you want to look at, and that's the continue or F5, which actually starts the debugging as well. Step over, which is really stepping each line of code, and then breakpoints. Step in, step out. If you have functions, just use that to go into the function, get out of the function. Restart and stop and disconnect. And stop, in this case, kills the debugger. When we start debugging, we're going to hit the drop down or hit F5 and select the option to start debugging. And then when the first time you run this, if you don't have Docker running in the background, this is the friendly message you're going to get. So this is basically telling you you don't have the Docker service running in the background. So once you have the Docker service running in the background, we're going to look at two different tabs across the bottom. The one is going to be the output. And just to equate this to what's happening, this is, if you ran this command from the command line, this is everything that's happening. More importantly, which kind of narrows down the focus for development and debugging, the debug console is only going to print out the stuff that your app is printing out in either console.log or console.errors. The last thing to kind of touch on is a breakpoint. And this is where I'm going to start kind of integrating some techniques that I like to use when I'm developing. I like to put a breakpoint at the very last line of my Lambda functions. That way, I stop right there. I can use it to look at other variables that have already done magic throughout my code and see what's happening. And then here's an example of what happens when you run it with the debugger on. Easily use the mouse, put it over the variable here, and see what the actual results are going to be. So I'll touch a little bit more on how to code fast and efficiently too, since we're almost got everything we need. One thing that I like to use, I call MVC, which is short for minimal viable code. If you come from the world of development, we live in a world where we have to deliver minimal viable products. You know, just a minimal version that just works. And I like to do that with the code snippets. So the way I do this is I'll type one line of code, even if it doesn't do anything, I will test it. And this is letting me incrementally figure out if this code and this code and this line of code work before I add more. And really what we're doing is we're trying to prevent the issue of sitting there for hours debugging one line. We're saving time. It'll actually feel like you're not saving time at first, but trust me, you'll also get that emotional build that I'm getting there. I'm getting the steps done. So to achieve this, we're going to test right away. Every time you write something, test it. You're going to see opportunities to refactor. You're going to do that. And then if you just type in one typo change, test it again. You'll thank me later. It feels like a lot of work now, but it's just a technique to make you a better developer. And you can kind of think of this as the precursor to test-driven development. You're doing it with your tests. So the last thing I wanted to touch on, and that might be like why we're using VS Code. And that's really to integrate and put everything in. So sorry about that. So if you can't take my word on it, if you need an example of why you want to need to use VS Code, Amazon has a great link right here. You can use that for any presentations or arguments, maybe with colleagues. So now let's get into what we really came here, and that's to make our Lambda function actually do something useful. So I wanted to talk a little bit of what the objectives are. So first, we're going to make an API call. In this example, I got a recipe website that's going to give us cocktails randomly. And then we're going to store those results in a JSON file in S3. And the reason later we'll eventually create a front end, like with React, and we'll be able to pull those results and show them easily in our app. And then later on, I want to get an email every time this runs, because I'm going to run this weekly to find out what the next random cocktail will be. And we're going to put it in production. The one thing though, is I want to get it down to, again, minimal viable product. So we'll save the email for last and another MVP. So just real quick, what we're going to use, I touched on an earlier slide. We're going to use S3. I didn't put that in there because that should be pretty simple. For storage, we're going to use System Manager for storing paths and variables that this script needs, because we do not want to keep variables in our script in case we're deploying it on different environments. We're going to use the Amazon SDK in our Node.js function, and we're Axios and the API call to that SPS file. So now we have everything we need. We just need to put some variables in the parameter store. So if you're new to parameter store, it's mainly the actual name of your variable is usually used as a path, kind of like a path to file system. You can just give this arbitrary names, but later on, if you grow and start using a lot of different parameters, it makes more sense to use a path structure like this. And then the variable. So in this example, I'm putting where I'm going to actually save this cocktail JSON file in my S3 bucket. In this situation, we're only going to have 2 parameters, but later on, if like the API you're calling needs username, password, or other credentials, you can also add these variables to parameter store to store them. Now, there is another way with Lambda functions to set these parameters and pass them on to the actual Lambda function with as defined variables or variables to the actual script. But and as we get into it, we're going to use an actual parameter store function to get these parameters. That way we can get them in real time without having to update and redeploy that. So, oh, it went too far. So we're going to take this Lambda function that we got. It had that hello world code in it, but then it got it. And now you got to see why. We're going to basically start making our sandwich for our Lambda function. And again, this is techniques in order to have you format things in the most efficient way. So to get there, we're going to take the top bun of our quick sandwich, and we're going to initiate some variables that we know we need for the coding into the function. We know we're going to need the S3 bucket and where we're going to store it. We're also going to need the SSM client. That's in order to get parameters from parameter store. And then also, we're going to need to return something at the end of this function. And we're going to wrap it in some nice JSON results. And in here, I kind of want to see what's happening to these variables. I want to see it outputted. So for now, I just put it in the key, put it in the body just for my sake. It's not for permanent coding. Then we're going to run this stuff. If you code everything correctly and you step through, you'll get to this breakpoint that I suggested, and you'll be able to put your mouse over and see, hey, we didn't get the variable, something happened. And and then if you run this again, once you have the right paths and you're able to get these values, which I'll show next, then these variables will be in the results. So let's start talking about filling the sandwich up with protein and the toppings. So here, I saw an opportunity that every time I'm doing something throughout the code, I'm going to have an error function. And I don't want to repeat the same code multiple times. So what I did is I created a function that I'm putting near the bottom outside of the current Lambda function that gets first called to handle errors. So I'm not duplicating code. Now I'm going to start coding to try to get these variables from parameters. Here I do a try catch, and I'll wait for the actual parameter. I'll touch on that a little bit on synchronous and asynchronous execution. But here, if you can see, I use the error function. If I run in a situation where I type something wrong or something's wrong, that function is going to grab it. And then we're going to run it again. We're going to hit F5, run through the debugger, and we're going to see that, hey, the code I typed in is working. We're good to go to the next step. So the next step here actually shows what happens if I had the path wrong or if something was incorrect. That error function is going to grab it. And I actually added an error, a breakpoint inside my error function as well to grab that situation while I'm debugging. And again, I'm doing everything in my VS Code. So I'm not having to alt tab or go into other applications to see what's happening. We're taking full advantage of the IDE. So now we're ready to start adding to our fast food that we're making and some French fries. So this is where the real meat and potatoes of everything is. We're going to call this API and get the results. So it's pretty simple. We're just going to set the URL. And I like to make it a variable to the URL because then I can actually see it in the debugger. And then I'll try with Axios to get the result. And if not, I'm going to reuse that common error function that I created. So using the debugger, I'm able to then run it again, check everything, and see, hey, here's the results of the recipe coming from the API. Axios is working correctly. Now, if you notice, I didn't do anything with the file yet. I'm still doing these little steps to make sure everything is working. Now we're ready for the dessert part. And normally, when I do this in Columbus, Ohio, I will have Wendy's slides up, but we're not there. But I do have a quick trivia question. Does anybody know where the founder, Dave Thomas, started his Wendy's business? What town? Yes. Yep, that's correct. So at the end, come and get me. I'll give you a free Frosty fob that'll work for the rest of the year. So let's get through it. So now we're going to use the S3 client and AWS's SDK. And we're going to take that file or the content from the file that we got from the Lambda function or from the random API to get a recipe and save it in our S3 bucket. So this kind of gives you the idea of what's going to happen. And for those that are not new with Node.js, I just updated these slides for version 18 of Node. So if you're like, I haven't seen it written this way, that's why it's a little different. But basically, you create an actual object, a put object command, and then you will call the actual command send with the variable sent to it. It's a little different than even a year or two ago. You did it a little different. You make this into a struct and pass it to a specific function to actually perform the function in the AWS S3 client. So here we'll dig in here a little bit more. This is actually a good example. Let me go back. So when I first coded this, I just wanted to get the job done, right? I Googled and found a solution. It said, you take the file that's stored on your file system and then you upload it to S3. So that's what I did in the first example. But refactoring, I quickly figured out, I kind of know as a developer, I already had the code, the results, the string. Do I have to save this in the local file system first before I upload? And sure enough, no. So I was able to eliminate a couple lines of code and just pass the whole string here, and it'll upload it in the S3. So now let's talk about deploying this into production. Luckily, this is going to be a piece of cake because we're using the SAM Hello World application. We're just going to type in SAM deploy --guided. And it'll walk you through asking you specific questions on where you want the actual Lambda function deployed, AKA the S3 bucket and the region and stuff, where you're going to put this in your Amazon account, and then it will deploy it for you. So let's talk a little bit then about the second MVP, right? We wanted to actually also get an email every time we run this thing, because someone's going to ask me, what's the recipe this week when I come in on Monday? So I need to have that without going into a database or going into S3. So it's going to look a little bit like this. You're going to create some HTML that you're going to put in your email, and you're going to use the SES input. They're making a struct of all the different variables that you're going to pass. And then you're going to create a new client, send the actual command. It's similar to the S3. And then you will wait for the results to come back when you actually send this actual email that you want to send. Let me touch a little bit in case people are new to SES. In a test environment, you will go into the AWS console. You'll find the SES area, and you just want to add your email address that you're going to use. And here I just use my personal email. And yes, you can email me at that. It's okay to have up on the screen. But I wanted to be able to get the results in my test environment. So when you go into SES, you'll enter your email address in the list, and then they'll send a confirmation. And Amazon sets this up so you don't accidentally just start sending out spam or affecting your own reputation for sending email, which is in your account, which is really good. So in this particular example, I got it to work, and this is where I'll leave homework for you guys. But I would put that email address then in parameter store as another setting, because you might want to have it go to other people, for example, when you put this in production. So what's next with this application? We would probably create a cloud formation. At least I would. I'd want to get it all wrapped up, get it out of using the SAM template, and actually make it a cloud formation just for future management, and to document it, of course. I would create a CI/CD pipeline, and sometimes when I'm quick and dirty, I'm really just using the npm run, and I set up something inside of the project.json. And I actually plan on doing is creating a React application, which will display the results for us and make a nice web interface for it. And who knows, I'll probably get feedback from everyone here and other folks of what I can do to improve the random recipe of the week. So that's all I have. I did have to say, don't bother with the survey because that's for a different conference. Sorry about that. But thanks again. And also, if anybody has questions, feel free to shoot me an email or find me on LinkedIn is where I'm most active now as far as social networks. Thanks a lot. And actually, let me make sure we are out of time. So perfect. If there's questions, though, hunt me down. I love talking shop.
Go ahead and get started.